There is something that happens the moment you stop reacting, and it is one of the most misunderstood shifts in the entire experience of recovering from a toxic relationship. For a long time, you may have believed that your emotional reactions were the problem, that if you could just stay calmer, explain better, prove yourself more clearly, or love harder, the chaos would finally settle. But what you are about to understand is something almost the opposite. In many controlling dynamics, your emotional reaction was never the problem. Your emotional reaction was the fuel. And when that fuel becomes less available, something in the entire structure of the relationship begins to change in ways that can feel almost unbelievable. That is what we are going to explore together, slowly and carefully, because this is not a small idea. It touches the core of why certain relationships felt so consuming, so confusing, and so impossible to walk away from. If this is the kind of understanding you have been searching for, take a moment now to subscribe. This space is for people who are learning to reclaim themselves after emotional manipulation. And staying connected means you will keep receiving the kind of psychological clarity that helps you heal rather than spiral. That one small action helps you stay on the path you have already started walking. Let us begin with what emotional detachment actually is, because the word is almost always misunderstood. When people hear emotional detachment, they often imagine coldness. They imagine becoming hard, unfeeling, distant, or cruel. They imagine shutting down every emotion until nothing can reach them anymore. But that is not detachment, that is shutdown, and the two are not the same thing at all. Genuine emotional detachment does not mean you stop feeling. It means you reduce the psychological control another person has over your attention, your emotions, your reactions, your decisions, and your sense of who you are. It means that their moods no longer dictate your inner weather. It means their approval is no longer the thing your nervous system chases from the moment you wake up. Detachment is not the death of feeling, it is the return of ownership over your own feeling. To understand why this matters so deeply, we have to look at how certain relationships are actually built. Not all difficult people are the same, and it is important to be honest about that. There is a difference between someone who has narcissistic traits, someone who repeats narcissistic patterns of behavior, and someone who genuinely meets the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Most people you encounter, even deeply hurtful ones, are not something you can or should diagnose. What matters for your healing is not a label. What matters is the pattern. And there is one pattern that sits at the center of so much of this pain. In many controlling dynamics, the connection is not built on mutual care. It is built on reaction. Your emotional responses become the thing that gives the other person a sense of power, relevance, and control. When you are upset, they feel significant. When you are anxious, they feel in charge. When you are chasing, explaining, defending, or trying desperately to be understood, they occupy the center of your emotional world. Your reactions confirm that they still matter to you, that they can still move you, that they still hold something over you. This is where attention becomes something more than affection. In healthy relationships, attention is a gift that flows both ways. In controlling ones, attention becomes a form of reinforcement. Every reaction you give, even the painful ones, feeds the dynamic. Anger is attention. Tears are attention. Long explanations are attention. Begging for clarity is attention. Even your silence, if it is a wounded, waiting silence, can become a kind of reaction they can sense and feed on. And here is where it becomes even more difficult to escape. Many of these dynamics run on something called intermittent reinforcement. This simply means that the good moments do not come consistently. They come unpredictably. Warmth, affection, closeness, and kindness appear just often enough to keep you hoping, but not often enough to feel safe. This unpredictability is powerful. Our minds become intensely attached to rewards that come at random intervals, far more than to rewards that come reliably. It is the same mechanism that makes uncertainty so gripping. You are never sure when the warmth will return, so you keep reacting, keep trying, keep staying emotionally available, waiting for the next moment of connection. Over time, this creates something that can feel almost like emotional dependency. Not because you are weak and not because you lack self respect, but because your nervous system has been trained. It has learned that relief comes from their approval, that danger comes from their displeasure, and that your job is to manage their emotions in order to survive the relationship. This is often what people mean when they talk about trauma bonding. It is a bond formed not through safety, but through cycles of distress and relief over and over until the cycle itself starts to feel like love. Now, think about what conflict does inside this structure. In many of these relationships, arguments are not really about resolving anything. They are a form of control. Conflict keeps you engaged, it keeps you emotionally activated, it keeps your attention locked onto them. There is often a cycle of provocation and reaction where something is said or done that pulls you in, you react, and then the reaction becomes the new focus of the conflict. Suddenly, you are the problem for being upset, rather than them being the problem for the thing that upset you. This is where blame shifting enters, quietly and constantly. You come in with a legitimate hurt, and somehow you leave apologizing. The subject changes, the focus turns to your tone, your past mistakes, your sensitivity, your reaction. Your original pain never gets addressed because it was never meant to be addressed. And alongside this comes emotional invalidation, the steady message that your feelings are wrong, exaggerated, unfair, or imagined. Over time, you begin to distrust your own perception. You begin to wonder if you really are too much, too sensitive, too difficult. So now let us return to the heart of this. If the entire dynamic runs on your reaction, what happens when the reaction becomes less available? What happens when the provocation comes and you simply observe it without stepping into the familiar dance? Something shifts. The usual levers stop working. The comment that used to send you spiraling lands in silence. The attempt to pull you into an argument finds no partner to argue with. The behavior that once produced hours of your emotional energy now produces almost nothing. And in a dynamic that was built on your reactivity, this absence is profoundly disorienting to the person who relied on it. This is not about claiming that every difficult person feels the same thing or that anyone secretly suffers in some identical dramatic way. We cannot see inside another human being, and it would be dishonest to pretend we can. What we can say carefully and honestly is this. When someone has built a pattern of gaining attention, validation, and control through your emotional reactions, the loss of those reactions disrupts the pattern. The predictability disappears. The reliable source of reinforcement dries up. The sense of control that came from being able to move you emotionally begins to slip. This is why detachment can feel like it changes everything. Arguments lose their previous power because they require your participation to continue. Manipulation becomes far less effective when you no longer feel compelled to defend yourself, prove yourself, convince them, or chase after resolution. And perhaps most importantly, when you stop reacting, you can finally see clearly. Behaviors that were once hidden inside the fog of constant conflict suddenly stand exposed. Patterns you could not name while you were inside the storm become obvious once the storm has nowhere to go. But I want to slow down here because none of this is really about them. This is where so many people take a wrong turn. They hear that detachment disrupts the dynamic and they turn it into a weapon. They start using silence as punishment. They start performing indifference to provoke a reaction. They monitor social media obsessively, trying to see if the other person noticed, trying to catch signs of regret. They try to make the person jealous, imagining that this is strength. But listen closely. None of that is detachment. All of that is still attachment wearing a disguise. Silence used as punishment is not detachment because it is still aimed at them. It is still trying to produce an effect in them. Genuine detachment has nothing to prove and no one to punish. It is not a strategy to make them come back or make them hurt. It is simply the quiet reclaiming of your own emotional center. And this is exactly why it is worth staying with this journey. If you are finding that these words are naming things you have felt but could never quite explain, consider subscribing so you can keep learning. This channel exists for people rebuilding their sense of self after manipulation and control, people learning about boundaries, self respect, and emotional healing. Staying here means you are choosing again and again to understand yourself rather than lose yourself. Now let us go inward because the hardest part of detachment is not what happens between you and them. It is what happens inside you. At first, detachment can feel frightening. This surprises people. They expect relief and instead they feel anxiety. But this makes complete sense when you understand that your nervous system was organized around this person. For a long time, your attention, your vigilance, your emotional energy were all pointed at them. When you begin to withdraw that focus, there is an emptiness where the chaos used to be, and chaos, as painful as it was, at least felt familiar. Peace in the beginning can feel strangely unbearable because you are not yet used to it. You may also find that you still miss them, even as you are becoming detached from the cycle. This confuses people terribly. They think that missing someone means the relationship was good or that leaving was a mistake, but you can miss a person and still be right to step away from the dynamic. You can grieve the connection you hoped for while releasing the cycle that harmed you. Missing them is not proof that you should return. It is simply proof that you are human, that you loved, that you hoped. Loneliness will also try to trick you. It will whisper that the relationship must have been healthy because you feel its absence so sharply. But loneliness is not a verdict on the relationship. It is only a signal that a space that was once filled is now open. That space was often filled with anxiety, walking on eggshells, and managing someone else's moods. The absence of that is not a loss. It is room to breathe, even if breathing feels unfamiliar at first. And then there is guilt, so much guilt. You may feel guilty for setting boundaries, guilty for not explaining yourself one more time, guilty for protecting your own peace. You may ask yourself again and again whether you are being selfish, whether you are the cruel one, whether a truly good person would have stayed and endured. Please understand that this guilt is often the echo of the invalidation you lived inside. You were trained to feel responsible for their emotions. Setting a boundary triggers that old training, and it screams at you that you have done something wrong. But protecting yourself is not cruelty. Reclaiming your peace is not selfishness. You may also notice that even after you intellectually understand everything, your body has not caught up. You may still feel the urge to check their messages, to look at their profile, to wait for contact. Your mind knows the truth, but your nervous system is still reacting to old patterns. This gap between understanding and feeling is normal. It does not mean you are failing. It means healing is happening on two levels, and the body simply takes longer than the mind. This is where I want to gently correct a belief that keeps many people stuck. Healing is not measured by whether you ever think about the person again. You may think about them for a long time. A memory may surface years from now. That is not failure. Healing is not the absence of thought. Healing is when the thought no longer controls your behavior, when their name can cross your mind and you do not reach for your phone, when a memory arrives and passes through you without pulling you back into the cycle. That is freedom, not forgetting, but no longer being commanded. So hear this clearly because it is the center of everything. You are not becoming heartless. You are becoming less controlled by the cycle. Detachment is not the loss of your capacity to love. It is the recovery of your capacity to choose. And this shift is quiet but enormous. You move from reacting to observing, from explaining yourself endlessly to simply choosing your response, from chasing clarity that never comes to accepting the reality that is already in front of you, from seeking validation outside yourself to slowly building validation within. The deeper you go, the more you begin to notice something almost startling. As your reactions quiet down, you start to see how much of the relationship was organized around reaction rather than genuine connection. The conflict that once seemed like passion was often just activation. The intensity that felt like love was often just the nervous system firing under stress. When the reactions stop, the absence of that noise reveals what was actually there, and sometimes what was there is far less than you believed. None of this means the goal is to become emotionally unavailable to everyone. This is crucial. Detachment from a harmful dynamic is not the same as closing your heart to the world. The aim is not to armor yourself so thoroughly that no one can ever reach you again. That would only be another form of shutdown, another prison, just with different walls. Healthy emotional regulation allows closeness, empathy, love, and vulnerability, while still maintaining boundaries. You can feel deeply and still choose wisely. You can love openly and still refuse to be controlled. That is the balance you are moving toward. There are quiet practices that support this. Pausing before you respond so that reaction does not run the show. Stopping the endless over-explaining because you do not owe a defense to someone determined to misunderstand you. Learning to recognize repeated patterns rather than treating each incident as isolated. Protecting your boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable. Reducing your exposure to communication that only reactivates the wound. And perhaps most importantly, no longer using their reaction as the measure of your worth. You return your attention to your own life. You begin to build relationships based on reciprocity, where care flows in both directions. You learn to allow uncomfortable emotions to exist without immediately acting on them, letting the wave rise and fall without reaching for your phone. You choose consistency over impulse. And you resist the temptation to monitor how they respond to your detachment because the moment you start tracking their reaction, you have turned your healing back into a strategy for controlling them, and you have handed the power back. All of this leads to one final realization, and it is the turning point of the entire journey. For a long time, you may have imagined that your freedom would arrive the day they finally understood what they lost, the day they apologized, the day they acknowledged the pain, the day they regretted it all. You may have been waiting for that moment as if it were the finish line of your healing. But here is the truth that changes everything. The real turning point is not when they finally understand. The real turning point is when you stop needing them to understand. Because as long as you are waiting for an apology, an acknowledgement, or a moment of regret, you are still attached. Your peace is still stored in their hands. You have made your healing dependent on a reaction from someone who may never give it, and that means you are still, in the deepest sense, controlled by them. Freedom does not begin when they change. Freedom begins the moment your healing no longer depends on anything they do or fail to do. So let us return to where we started, to the meaning of emotional detachment itself. It is not punishment. It is not revenge. It is not a performance designed to be noticed. It is not pretending you never cared. It is something far quieter and far more powerful than any of those things. It is the gradual reclaiming of emotional authority over your own life. It is the slow, steady process of taking back your attention, your reactions, your decisions, and your sense of self from a dynamic that once claimed all of it. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming free. You are not closing your heart. You are choosing who gets access to it. You are not walking away in bitterness. You are walking forward in ownership of your own life. And every day that you choose your own peace over the pull of the old cycle, you are teaching your nervous system a new truth, that you are safe now, that you are allowed to feel calm, that your life belongs to you again. If this journey resonates with you, stay with it. Subscribe and continue learning about recovery from narcissistic abuse, emotional boundaries, self-respect, emotional regulation, and the deeper work of psychological healing. You are not just watching content. You are choosing again and again to return to yourself. And that choice, repeated quietly over time, is how a life is reclaimed.